The galaxy is a wound. It bleeds stars. It festers with nightmares older than time. And it hungers. It hungers for worlds, for souls, for the very light of reason. We have built an empire to cauterize that wound. We have forged a god of blood and gold to sit upon the throne of that empire. And in his name, we have created a machine. Not a machine of gears and pistons, though it groans with them. Not a machine of logic and data, though it drowns in them, but a machine of souls. A vast galactic engine, fueled by human suffering, oiled with human blood, and governed by a single unbreakable law. The machine must continue, at any cost. To question the cost is heresy. To tally the suffering is treason. To see the machine for what it is a death sentence. This is not a story of war against alien hordes. This is not a tale of heroism against demonic legions. This is a quieter, colder horror. This is a story of a single, flawed cog who dared to look up from his station, who saw the rust, who heard the screams and the grinding of the gears, and who, in one quiet moment of perfect, terrifying clarity, decided he would not be the one to pull the lever. His name was Aris Thorne. He was a navigator, and he committed the ones in the machine could never forgive. He saw the truth, and he chose to be silent. If you find yourself in this quiet space between the thunder artillery and the scream of the warp, if you understand that the truest horrors are often whispered, not shouted, then consider lending your Vox channel to this tale. Your vigilance strengthens the Imperium. Subscribe and remain watchful. The air on the bridge of the obedient path was always cold. It was a manufactured chill, pumped through ancient grills to keep the human components alert, to prevent the sweat of fear from shorting out delicate consoles. Navigator Aris Thorne rarely noticed it. His blood, thinned by generations of void living and warp touch, ran cold by nature. But in this moment he felt a deeper freeze, one that started in the marrow of his bones and spread outwards, frosting his skin from the inside. It was the cold of perfect, absolute realization. Before him, hovering in the grainy green light of his hololithic slate, spun a complex string of numbers and navigational sigils. They were the product of 6 hours of intense calculation, cross-referencing the ship's position against the faint, psychic scream of the Astronomicon, that distant lighthouse on Holy Terra. The numbers were perfect. They were pristine. They were a death sentence. His third eye, the warp sight buried beneath the jewel band on his forehead, throbbed with a dull, confirming ache. The coordinates were not for a standard translation into the Imperium. They were a specific, pinpoint location for a real space arrival. The slate wasn't plotting a jump. It was plotting a destination. And that destination, with a margin of error so small it was theological, was Sol System, Holy Terra, the throne world itself. The slate emitted a soft, polite chime. Calculation complete. Awaiting vocal authorization. The sound was obscenely cheerful. Thorne did not move. His hands, pale and long-fingered, rested on the polished cherubwood rail of his navigation pulpit. Around him, the bridge was a cathedral of muted activity. Officers spoke in low tones into their Vox grills. Servitors, their flesh fused with data ports, chanted binary streams to the machine spirit. The great oculus at the front of the chamber showed only the swirling, magnificent emptiness of the void, dotted with indifferent stars. No one was looking at him. No one could see the hololithic display from his private station. He was an island of perfect, screaming silence in a sea of dutiful noise. To input these coordinates, to speak them aloud to the master of the Vox, would be to initiate a sequence of events as immutable as gravity. The report would go up the chain. A freighter arriving unscheduled at the absolute heart of the Imperium, it would be met not by docking crews, but by the guns of the Adeptus custodes. They would not ask questions first. They would blast the obedient path into atoms, and then they would trace its origin. They would find the world it had last orbited, a humid, hive-covered planet called Viridian 9, and they would assume the worst. Taint, corruption, a genestealer cult perhaps, or worse, a chaos plot to breach the sanctity of the solar system. The response would be automatic, doctrinal, and total. Exterminatus. A world of 17 billion souls, rendered to ash on the altar of security. All because of a flaw in a data slate. All because he had done his job correctly. He reached out, his finger hovering over the slate's rune to clear the data. A simple press. A reset. He could claim a momentary warp phantom had disrupted his sight, demand a recalibration. It would cause a delay, a minor note in the ship's log. It would be safe. It would be sane. But his finger did not press. He stared at the numbers, at the beautiful, deadly logic of them. This was the Imperium's true face. He realized in that frozen instant, not the heroic sagas, not the grand cathedrals, but this, a boundless, galaxy-spanning engine of paranoia, where a single misplaced decimal point could trigger genocide. He was not a hero facing a demon. He was a functionary staring at a clerical error that had grown teeth. And the machine, the great and terrible machine, was waiting for him to feed it. A breath he did not realize he was holding escaped his lips, forming a faint mist in the chilled air. The sound was too loud in the cocoon of his pulpit. He glanced, a movement too sharp, too human, towards the command dais. Captain Jens, a block of man carved from generations of naval service, was engrossed in a dataset of his own, his brow furrowed at some report about water reclamation efficiency. The master of the Vox, a severe woman named Alara, stood at her station like a statue, her hands clasped behind her back, waiting. She was always waiting. Hers was the voice that would chant the coordinates into the ship's ancient spirit, the sacred liturgy that would coax the Geller field to life and part the veil of reality. Her head was tilted slightly, a Vox bead glowing in her ear. She was listening for him. The entire bridge, in its quiet, mechanical way, was listening for him. The machine was patient. It could wait a lifetime for a cog to perform its function, but it would not wait forever. Thorne's mind, trained for complex multidimensional calculus, now turned inwards, racing down corridors of consequence. If he reported the coordinates, he was a loyal servant. He would have done his duty flawlessly. The deaths of Viridian 9 would be a tragedy, but a necessary one, a surgical amputation to save the body of the Imperium. His conscience, if he dared consult it, could be salved with doctrine. The Emperor protects. Sometimes, protection looks like fire. He would sleep in his soft quarters, eat his fine meals, and continue his noble lineage. If he did not report them, that path vanished into shadow. It was not just a lie of omission. It was active treachery. It was manipulating the sacred journey of an imperial vessel. It was, by the strictest letter of 1,000 laws, an act of heresy punishable by death and the obliteration of his household. The novice Nobilite would disavow him. His family's charter would be burned. His name would become a curse. For what? For the hope that some other, later check in the Byzantine administrator would catch the error? For the faint, foolish notion that 17 billion strangers were worth the extinction of his own soul? His eyes drifted from the slate to the oculus. Viridian 9 was not visible, just a distant, unremarkable speck of light. He had been dirtside once, 3 years ago, during a prolonged resupply. He remembered the smell, a thick, organic cocktail of recycled air, human sweat, and a faint, sweet rot of fungal vats that fed the lower hives. He remembered the sound, a constant, low-grade thunder of machinery in distant crowds, like the heartbeat of a sickened giant. He remembered faces, blurred and nameless. A street vendor selling skewers of gristly meat, her eyes tired but sharp. A gang of hive-scummed children chasing a deflated ball through a dripping alley, their laughter shockingly bright against the grime. Lives. Not statistics in the planetary ledger, but lives. They were praying to the same emperor he was, suffering under the same Imperium, feeding the same machine. And he was the man at the lever. The cold in his bones deepened, crystallizing into a resolve so quiet it was terrifying. He could not pull it. The machine could demand it. The captain could order it. The God Emperor himself, from his golden throne, might will it. But Aris Thorne, in this silent, frozen moment on the bridge of the obedient path, decided his hand would not move. His finger, still hovering, shifted. Instead of the clear rune, he tapped a sequence on the slate's edge, inputting a manual override. He began to alter the numbers. Not much. A subtle shift in the longitudinal alignment, a fractional adjustment to the temporal reference. The The new coordinates pointed to a patch of empty space a half-light-year spinward from the Viridian system, a safe translation point for a subsequent corrected jump. It was a lie. A clean, elegant mathematical lie. The slate chimed again, accepting the new data. His throat was desert dry. He opened the Vox channel to the bridge, his voice a stranger's, calm, flat, utterly normal. "Master the Vox," he intoned, the ritual words ash on his tongue. "Coordinates are locked and verified. Prepare for translation on my mark." Illyra's head nodded, a single sharp movement. "Aye, Navigator." Coordinates received. The machine spirit hungers for the journey. The deck beneath his feet began to thrum with gathering power. The deed was done. The stain was not erased. It was hidden, buried under a perfect, beautiful falsehood. The ship prepared to plunge into the hell of the warp, and Aris Thorne, Navigator 3rd Class, felt the first true warmth he'd known in hours. The burning flush of guilt. The warp trip was a standard 5-day translation. 5 days in the screaming, color-soaked unreality of the Imperium, where time bled insanity was a fragile raft on a sea of madness. For Thorne, it was a 5-day descent into a private hell far more precise than any demonic incursion. The Geller field held, a bubble of shuddering reality around the ship, but his navigator's sight could not be fully shielded. He felt the presences out there, the vast, hungry things that brush against the field with the curiosity of sharks nosing a submarine. They were horrors, yes, but they were simple horrors. They wanted to eat, to corrupt, to play. Their motives were alien, but they were motives. They had a kind of terrible purity. The real torment was inside the field, inside his own skull. It was the pristine, cold clarity of his sin. He had falsified an Imperial naval document. He had subverted the sacred trust of his station. Every thrum of the engines, every chant of the engine seers in the depths, every hushed order on the bridge was now a testament to his betrayal. The ship, his home for 7 standard years, had become an extension of his crime, carrying it silently through the storm. He took his meals in his quarters, picking at the rich food that seemed to taste of nothing. He performed his duty shifts, his eyes on the swirling madness outside, his mind trapped in a loop of recrimination and fragile justification. He watched the crew, the junior ratings who polished the same brass fittings every day, their world no larger than their assigned deck, the armsmen who stood their posts with stoic boredom, dreaming of a fight that would never come, the tech priests who scurried through maintenance ducts, whispering binary hymns to dormant machine spirits. They were all cogs. They turned, they ground, they performed their function. None of them had to decide the fate of a world. Their lives were hard, often short, but they were blessedly simple. A part of him envied them with a ferocity that shocked him. He had been raised in the cloister halls of the novice Nobilite, taught that his third eye was a blessing, a mark of superiority that granted him a universe of vistas closed to common men. Now he understood the truth. It was a curse. It granted him not vistas, but precipices. It showed him the awful levers of power, and forced him to choose whether to pull them. His calculations were perfect. That was the cruelest joke. The lie he had fed the ship's logic engines was flawless. The translation back to real space was smooth, the obedient path emerging into the silent black, exactly where his falsified coordinates had promised. The alarm for translation successful was a soft, melodic bell. On the bridge, there was a collective, subtle release of tension. A rating offered a quick prayer to the Emperor. Captain Jens gave a satisfied nod. It was over. They were safe. For them, it was a routine jump. For Thorne, it was the closing of a cell door. He had done it. He had stolen a world from the jaws of Imperial justice. He had saved 17 billion lives by committing an act that, if discovered, would see him flayed alive. The weight of it settled on him, not as a burden, but as a new atmosphere. This was the air he would breathe now. This was the man he was. Not a loyal servant, but a secret savior. Not a cog, but a crack in the machine. He felt no pride, only a profound, isolating loneliness. He was now the sole keeper of a truth, so dangerous it could shatter fleets. And he had to live with it, move with it, speak with it sitting on his tongue for the rest of his days, however few they might be. The days that followed were a study, in phantom pain. Thorne moved through the ship's routine like a ghost haunting his own life. Every interaction became a performance. He smiled thinly at the quartermaster discussing nutrient-paste yields. He offered a respectful nod to the chaplain who gave the daily dawn sermon on duty and sacrifice. He even played a game of regicide with the ship's Moros Medici, moving pieces on the board with mechanical precision, while his mind screamed. He was certain his guilt was a beacon, a psychic stench that every soul aboard must surely smell. But the machine ground on, oblivious. The crew saw only their navigator, a pale and quiet aristocrat, which was exactly what it had always been. The mask, he realized with dawning horror, was not something he had to put on. It was his own face. His upbringing, his training, his entire existence had been a preparation for this exact duality. To stand apart, to hold secrets, to bear the weight of truths that would break lesser men. His heresy was simply a new, darker secret to hold. The thought brought no comfort, only a colder, more clinical kind of despair. He began to watch the ship's data flow with a new, paranoid intimacy. His navigation pulpit had limited access to the secondary logs, the endless river of information that fed the ship's memory. Thermal readings, radiation spikes, minor hull stress fractures, promethium consumption rates. It was a vessel's subconscious, a million tiny whispers about his health. His lie, he knew, would have left a trace. A ship does not travel through the warp without cost. The Geller field generators burned energy at a specific rate. The engines consumed fuel along a predictable curve. His falsified coordinates had added a negligible, but real, extra distance to their journey. A few extra hours in the Imperium. It would manifest as a fractional overexpenditure of resources, a ghost in the data. He watched for it, and on the third day post-translation, he saw it. A single line item in the daily logistical digest, compiled by a servitor in the bowels of the logistics office. Promethium expenditure for main transit, 0.04% above projected theoretical consumption. Variance noted. Cause unknown. Log for archival. It was there, a tiny bureaucratic hiccup. An unknown cause in a universe that hated the unknown. To anyone else, it was nothing, a rounding error, a machine spirit's momentary whim. To Thorne, it was a first footprint in fresh snow, leading directly back to him. He forced himself to breathe, to think. The log was archival. It would be stored in the ship's data core, a memory among quintillions. It would only be examined if someone went looking. Who would look? A diligent logistics adept, perhaps during a routine efficiency audit schedule for the end of the fiscal year. Or, more worryingly, an agent of the ship's internal security, the ever-watchful remembrancers of the captain's staff, whose job was to ensure no detail, however minute, escaped the Imperial record. The machine was not sentient, but it was exhaustive. It forgot nothing. It simply waited for a pattern to emerge, for anomalies to cluster. One variance was a curiosity. 2 would be a discrepancy. 3 would be an investigation. He was not safe. He had bought time, not freedom. The world of Iridian 9 spun on, blissfully unaware of the sword that hovered over it, now diverted by a single man's trembling hand. But the sword was still sharp, and it was now turning with infinite, grinding slowness, point first toward the hand that had dared to push aside. A week passed in the deep void. The obedient path was en route to its next scheduled port, a dusty agri-world where it would take on bulk grain for the hive armies of the Galgena Reach. The Promethium variance was not mentioned again. The ship settled into the long, dull rhythm of interstellar travel, a symphony of hums, clanks, and whisper prayers. Thorne's fear, a wild animal in his chest, began to grow sluggish. Perhaps he had been lucky. Perhaps the machine was so vast, so choked with data, that his tiny sin had simply been swallowed by the noise. He allowed himself to think of the future, a frayed and fragile thing. He would serve out his contract. Another 8 years. He would retire to his family's estates, a respected, if quiet, veteran of a void. He would carry the secret to his grave, a hidden scar on his soul. It was a bleak paradise, but it was a form of survival. He began to sleep for more than fitful hours. He tasted his food again. The performance of normalcy became slightly less of a strain. It was a surveyor's servitor, that broke the silence. The thing was a pitiful construct, little more than a human torso, and had bolted into a ceiling track and surveyor spire, its eyes replaced by constantly whirring auger lenses, its mouth a static vox grill. Its sole function was to monitor the passive sensor rays and vocalize any anomaly into the ship's log. It had no consciousness, no capacity for curiosity. It simply reported. On the 11th day, during the dead hour of the third watch, its monotone voice crackled over an isolated data channel, one monitored only by a sleeping junior astrogation aide and the ever-listening ship's log. Asterisk anomaly logged. Stellar spectral analysis of local sector primaries shows minor deviation from recorded cartographical data. Variance 0.0001 arc seconds in luminosity of designated star Viridian Sol. Possible navigational chart error. Archival note appended. Asterisk, the words meant nothing to the sleeping aide, who grunted and rolled over. They were a thunderclap to Thorne, monitoring the bridge's peripheral data feeds from his quarters. The servitor hadn't found his lie. It had found the truth. His falsified coordinates had placed him in a slightly different real space location than their official charts predicted. The stars themselves were off by a hair's breadth. The machine was cross-referencing reality against its maps, and reality was disagreeing. This was worse than the Prometheum log. This was a direct contradiction of Imperial authority. The sacred maps issued by the Adeptus Astronomica. A chart error was a serious matter. It implied fallibility in a system that claimed divine perfection. It would trigger a mandatory diagnostic of the ship's entire navigational suite, including a full data dump from his own pulpit. They would compare the coordinates he had calculated with the coordinates he had reported. The discrepancy, the tiny, life-saving lie, would be laid bare. The cold sweat returned, slicking his palms. He had to act. He was not an enginseer. He could not hack the data core. He was not a tech priest. He could not commune with the machine spirit and persuade it to forget. He was a navigator. His power was over the unreal, not the digital. His only tools were his station and his wits. He rose, his heart hammering against his ribs, and made his way to the bridge. The night watch was skeletal, dimly lit by the glow of inactive consoles. He went straight to the surveyor station, his authority unquestioned. He called up the raw data stream from the servitor. There it was, the damning line of code. His fingers flew over the console, inputting a command to tag the anomaly as a confirmed sense of ghost, a known echo effect from their recent warp translation. He attached an override authorization code from a novice Nobilite, a string of digits that would silence most automated queries. The log updated. The anomaly was reclassified, buried under layers of bureaucratic justification. He stood back, his breath shallow. It was another layer of the lie, a patch over a crack that was still spreading. 2 days later, the summons came. It was not a dramatic affair with armed armsmen. It was a polite, text-only message on his personal data slate, delivered by a blank-faced servitor. Asterisk Navigator Aris Thorne is requested to attend the captain's ready room at 0900 hours ship time to consult on matters of navigational data integrity. Captain's office. Asterisk, the word were dry, professional. There was no accusation. But Thorne knew the language of the machine. A request from the captain was an order. Consultation was an interrogation. Data integrity was a crime scene. They were not coming for him in the night. They were inviting him in for a quiet, rational conversation. The machine had processed the variances, the anomalies, the overrides. A pattern had formed in its blind, logical mind. It had identified a potential malfunction. And now, it was beginning the diagnostic. The silence he had created was over. It was being replaced by the soft, inexorable sound of turning gears. The captain's ready room was a stark contrast to the Gothic grandeur of the bridge. It was small, utilitarian, and smelled of stale recaf, ozone, and the faint, sweet oil used to polish leather. Captain Yen sat behind a metal desk scarred by a century of data slates and mug rings. He did not look up as Thorne entered, his focus on a sheaf of parchment flimsies. To his right stood a man Thorne knew only by sight and reputation, Adept Vorin, head of the ship's logistical office. He was cadaverously thin, his augmetic eyes a series of clicking lenses, his fingers twitching as if constantly inputting data to an invisible slate. He was the embodiment of the machine's memory. Jens finally gestured to a hardback chair. Navigator, thank you for coming. Please sit. His voice was neutral, the voice of a man discussing hull integrity or water rationing. Thorne sat, forcing his body to relax into the chair, a posture of attentive ease. Captain, Adept, how may I assist? Jens slid a single flimsy across the desk. It was Consolidated Report. Thorne's eyes scanned it, his blood turning to ice. It was all there. The Prometheum variance, the stellar cartographical anomaly, his own override authorization code, logged next to the reclassification of the sensor data. The report did not accuse. It simply presented 3 discrete irregularities, all temporally linked to their last warp jump. At the bottom, in Voron's precise, spidery script, was a note. Asterisk pattern of minor systemic discrepancies suggest potential calibration drift in primary navigational systems. Recommended. Full diagnostic and data core cross-reference for Journey V 9-778.4/A. Asterisk Jens tapped the paper. Adept Voron is thorough. He believes our machine spirit may be grumbling, showing inconsistencies. Before I order a full systems lockdown and a tech ritual that would put us adrift for a week, I wanted your professional opinion. He looked at Thorne, his gaze flat. You were at the locus of this jump. Did you experience any warp phantoms? Any feedback in your sight that might have skewed the data? The question was a trap dressed as a courtesy. If Thorne claimed a warp phantom, it would explain the anomalies, but would also mandate a full psychic debriefing and a report to the novice Nobilite, an inquiry far more invasive than Voron's. If he denied it, the focus would remain on the systemic discrepancies, the cold, hard data that pointed to manipulation. Thorne chose the third path, the path of arrogant expertise. He allowed a flicker of disdain to touch his lips, directed not at Jens, but at the flimsy. Captain, with respect, the Adept deals in numbers. I deal with the raw currents of the Imperium. A variance of 0.04% in Prometheum is within the standard deviation for a Geller field fluctuation. The stellar anomaly is sensor echo, a known phenomenon I already corrected. My override was standard procedure to prevent the log from being cluttered with false positives. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a confidential tone. A full diagnostic is a disruption. It implies a failure of faith in the vessel. The machine spirit, if questioned so bluntly, may take offense. I have felt no grumbling, only a successful translation. He held Jens' gaze, selling performance with every fiber of his being. He was a noble expert, slightly bored by the petty concerns of being counters. For a long moment, the only sound was a click whir of Voron's optic lenses as they focused on Thorne's face. Jens sighed, a sound of a man burdened by administrative minutiae. He looked at Voron. Adept? The Navigator's assessment seems reasonable. Can your office tolerate these variances as non-critical noise? Voron's head tilted. His voice was a dry rustle. The data is the data, Captain. The pattern exists. But the Navigator's point about spirit offense is noted. The diagnostic can be postponed, but the anomalies will remain logged. The data must be preserved. Jens nodded, a decision made. Very well. Log them and archive them. We'll revisit if a fourth anomaly appears. Thank you, Navigator. That will be all. Thorne stood, offered a shallow bow, and left. The door hissed shut behind him. He walked 10 paces down the corridor before he had to stop, leaning against the cold metal wall, his legs trembling. He had won a reprieve, but Voron's last words echoed in his skull. The data must be preserved. The machine had not forgotten. It had merely filed the evidence away, waiting. The fourth anomaly did not appear. It was conjured. Adept Voron, it seemed, was not satisfied with Navigator's arrogance overriding his pristine data. The machine's logic was his religion, and a pattern of 3 was a trinity of truth. He could not force a diagnostic, but he could dig. In the silent, tomb-like vaults of the ship's data core, surrounded by the hum of thinking engines and the glow of rune lights, he began a deeper audit. He pulled the raw telemetry from the nav pulpit for the jump in question. He compared the initial astrofix calculations, the numbers Thorne Slate had first produced, against the final coordinates that were voxed to the bridge. He was looking for a ghost in the machine, and he found a phantom, a discrepancy so small it was almost beautiful in its precision. The longitudinal alignment was off by a figure that corresponded exactly to the positional error suggested by the stellar survey. It was not a system error. It was a manual alteration. A human hand had changed the numbers after calculation and before transmission. Vorin did not go to the captain this time. He followed protocol, the sacred chain of command. He compiled a new report, a single devastating page of data points and conclusions. This report went to the ship's chief remembrancer, an ancient parchment-skinned official named Marl, whose sole purpose was to be the captain's eyes in the shadows. Marl read the report in the perfect silence of his sealed office. He did not rage. He did not smile. He felt a quiet, professional satisfaction. Corruption was a weed, and he was the gardener tasked with pulling it. He authorized a quiet, immediate seizure of the Navigator's personal data slates and a deep scan of his pulpit's memory banks. He did not send arms men. He sent two of his own remembrancer aides, polite, gray-clad men with neutral expressions and the authority to go anywhere. They came to Thorne's quarters during his sleep cycle. Their knock was firm, not loud. Thorne opened the door, the fog of sleep dissolving into instant, crystalline dread. The aide showed him a sigil-etched slate bearing Marl's authority. Navigator Thorne, by order of the captain's remembrancer, we are to collect all personal data slates and navigation aids for routine fidelity verification. Please comply. There was no room for refusal. Wordlessly, Thorne handed over the two slates from his desk. One contained personal letters from his family, years out of date. The other held his private navigational journals, musings on warp currents. They were innocuous. The real evidence was in the ship's own systems, in the log he had already tampered with. But as the aides turned to leave, one paused. Your navigation pulpit will also be scanned. You are to refrain from accessing it until the verification is complete. Please remain in your quarters for the next 12 hours. Your meals will be brought to you. The door shut. The lock cycled with a soft, final thunk. Not a brig, but a gilded cage. The arrest had begun not with a clang of steel, but with a whisper of bureaucratic procedure. He was not a prisoner yet. He was a component under inspection. The scan of his pulpit took 6 hours. The machine spirit, when politely asked by authorized remembrancer tech adepts, had no loyalty. It surrendered its memory. The override command, the alteration timestamps, the original, terrifying coordinates, all was recovered, pulled from the depths like a corpse from a lake. The evidence was laid before Chief Remembrancer Marl, who laid it before Captain Jens. This time, there was no ready room meeting. The summons, when it came, was different. 4 armsmen in full carapace armor, their faces hidden behind helmets, their hell guns held in a posture that was not quite threatening, but was absolutely ready. Their sergeant's voice was distorted by his vox grill. Navigator Aris Thorne, you are to come with us to the captain's briefing chamber. Immediately. This was not a request. It was an escort. As he walked between them to the ship's corridors, crew members averted their eyes, melting into doorways. They knew the sight. The machine had identified a faulty part. Now it was being removed for assessment. The silence that followed him was the silence of a ship holding its breath. The briefing chamber was a cold, circular room used for tactical updates, its walls lined with tactical hollow projectors, now dark. Captain Yen stood at the head of a plain metal table. Chief Remembrancer Marl to his right, a data slate before him. The 4 armsmen took positions at the door, becoming part of the architecture. Thorne was not offered a seat. He stood, feeling the vast, empty space of the room around him, a hollow counterpoint to the tight, screaming cell of his own thoughts. Yen's face was granite. There was no anger in it, only a profound, weary disappointment. Navigator Thorne, he began, his voice echoing slightly. The evidence presented by the Remembrancer is incontrovertible. You calculated a navigational solution that pointed to Holy Terra. You then falsified the coordinates, diverting this vessel, and filed a false report to cover your actions. He paused, letting the words hang in the sterile air. The only question that remains is why. Was it error? Was it madness? Or was it, his voice dropped, becoming even colder, intent? Did you mean to plot a course for Terra and then lose your nerve? Thorne said nothing. Any defense was meaningless. The data was the data. To speak of saving a world would be to admit the crime and utter a heresy just as great, suggesting that Imperial doctrine was wrong. He remained silent, his head held high, not in defiance, but in a numb acceptance. Marl spoke, his voice like dry leaves. The falsification itself is a capital offense. The destination of the original calculation mandates an inquisitorial review. A black ship from the Ordo Xenos has been notified. They are diverting to intercept us. You will be remanded into their custody. The words, black ship, landed with physical weight. It was not just execution. It was dissolution. His mind would be scoured, his soul probed, his very genetic lineage examined for flaw. His family would be shamed, his household perhaps dissolved. The machine did not just remove faulty cogs. It melted them down for scrap. He was taken not to the brig, but to a secure holding cell adjacent to the shuttle bay, a blank, featureless box with a single bench and a heavy, reinforced door. They left him there, alone with the hum of the ship and the specter of his end. Time lost meaning. He replayed the moment on the bridge, the drop of ink, the freezing terror. He did not regret it. That was a strange, solid core within the storm of his fear. He saw the street vendors' tired eyes. He heard the children's laughter in the dripping alley. He had bought them time. It was all he could think to cling to. The cell door hissed open. He expected armsmen. Instead, a bent, robed figure shuffled in, guided by a silent servitor. It was the ship's astropath, Silas. He was ancient, his eyes milky orbs, his face a roadmap of scars from a lifetime of screaming messages into the psychic void. The door closed, leaving them in the semi-darkness. The astropath, his head turned unerringly towards Thorne, though he had no sight. "They say you are a traitor," Silas whispered, his voice a ruin of static and pain. "They say you lied to the machine." Thorne could not find words. The old man's presence was not accusatory. It was curious. "I have spent 60 years, Silas continued, slowly lowering himself onto the bench with a creak of aged joints, listening to the screams of the galaxy, the war cries, the death rattles, the prayers. So many prayers. They rise like a tide towards a throne world, a deafening roar of agony and faith. He reached out a trembling, spotted hand, not to touch Thorne, but to gesture at the air. "My question, Navigator, has always been, does he hear them? Not as a god might hear him, but does he feel them? Each one? The Emperor is not a man on a chair. He is a phenomenon, a psychic singularity, a wound in reality sustained by sacrifice." He turned his blind eyes towards Thorne. If every death in his name is a drop of oil on the gears of empire, a note in the scream, what is a life spared? Thorne stared, his mind reeling. "What are you saying?" "Nothing official. Nothing doctrinal. Just a rumor, a whisper that passes between those of us who traffic in whispers. They say that on the Golden Throne, he does not rule. He endures. His consciousness is shattered, spread across time and thought, holding back a tide that would drown us all. And in that endless, fractured suffering, perhaps he perceives pressure, the immense, crushing weight of all the pain offered to him. And so, if that is true, could a moment of mercy, a single silent act of defiance against the cruel logic of the machine, could it register? Not as a prayer, but as its opposite, a tiny, negative space in the agony. A fraction of a second where the pressure lessens. Silas leaned closer, his breath sour. "I am not offering you hope, boy. There is no hope in that place. Only pain. But I am offering you a theory. You chose the silent path. You added your silence to the roar. Perhaps, in the calculus of suffering God, such a thing has a weight all its own. A different kind of offering." The old astropath stood, his servitor moving to guide him. He paused at the door. "The black ship comes. Your path ends in fire and interrogation. But the world you spared spins on. Your silence echoes. In a galaxy of endless screaming, that is a rare thing." He left. Thorne was alone again. The astropath's words were not absolution. They were a darker, more complex mystery. He was not a hero. He was a malfunction. But perhaps, in the incomprehensible economy of a dying empire, even a malfunction could have meaning. The door opened again, this time for the armsmen. It was time, as they led him to the waiting, ominous shuttle in the bay, its hull black and devoid of markings. He looked back one last time into the familiar corridors of the obedient path. The engines thrummed. The crew went about their duties. The machine continued, untouched. It had expelled its flawed component. It would grind on toward the agri-world, then the next, and the next, forever. But Aris Thorne, walking into the dark, carried with him a final, fragile thought. Somewhere, in a dripping hive alley on a forgotten world, a child was laughing. And for now, because of a single silent cog, that laugh was not ash. The black ship was called the Ashen Wake. Its interior was a tomb of quiet horror, all dampened psychic insulation and corridors that seemed to swallow sound and light. Thorne was processed with chilling, dispassionate efficiency. His fine navigator's robes were taken, replaced with a coarse, gray smock. He was scanned, probed by humming devices that made his third eye ache with feedback. He was placed in a cell that was not a cell, but a smooth, ovoid chamber with no visible door, only a shimmering energy field. There was no bench, no bed. He sat on the cold, seamless floor, waiting. The silence here was absolute, a pressure on the ears. This was the end of his journey. The machine of the Imperium had found its error and was now delivering it to the specialists who would determine why it had failed. He thought of Silas, the astropath. The old man's words were a splinter in his mind, a tiny, negative space in the agony. It was a poet's notion, a fragment of solace passed between broken men. It had no place in the doctrinal realities of the Inquisition. They would not care about negative spaces. They would care about motive, method, conspiracy. They would peel his mind apart layer by layer to find it. He prepared himself for the pain, for the violation. He tried to fortify his memories of Iridian 9, to lock them away in a secret corner of his soul where even the mind probes might not reach. He would not give them the satisfaction of his regret. His silence would be his final act. But the Interrogator, when he came, was not what Thorne expected. He was a young man, lean, with sharp, intelligent eyes that held not fanaticism, but a deep, calculating curiosity. He did not wear the ostentatious power armor of an Inquisitor Lord. He wore a simple black body glove, a rosette pinned at his collar. He entered the cell as the energy field dropped, carrying no tools, no instruments of torture. He simply sat on the floor opposite Thorne, crossing his legs. "Navigator Thorne," he said. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "My name is Interrogator Kael. I have read the obedient path logs. I have seen the data, the original coordinates, your alteration, the cover-up. It is a fascinating sequence of events." He paused, studying Thorne's face. "Captain Jens believes you are a coward who lost his nerve on the brink of a terrible duty. Remembrancer Morrow believes you are a traitor with heretical intent. Adept Voran believes you are a statistical anomaly. What you believe you are?" The question, asked so plainly in the sterile quiet, disarmed Thorne. He had prepared for accusations, for pain, not for philosophy. He met Kael's gaze. "I believe I saw a flaw in the machine," he said, his voice hoarse from disuse. "A flaw that would have consumed an innocent world. I chose not to be the mechanism of that consumption." Kael nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something. "A moral choice, taken in defiance of Imperial law. You understand this makes you, by definition, a heretic." "I understand," Thorne said. "The world, Iridian 9. Kael continued, pulling a small data slate from his belt. He called up a file. 6 weeks after your intervention, a routine Adeptus Arbite sweep and hive, Secundus uncovered a nascent genestealer cult. A small one, 30 individuals. They were purged. Cleanly. No Exterminatus required." He looked up. "Had your original report been filed, and the planet subjected to cyclonic torpedoes, the cult would have been destroyed?" "Yes. Along with everything else. Your act of heresy, Navigator, allowed that world to live long enough for its own immune system, the Arbites, to find the infection and cut it out. The Imperium was saved the waste of the planet. Billions of tax-paying souls continue to serve. The strategic outcome is identical. The method was merely different. Thorne stared, unable to process the words. Kael was not condemning him. He was analyzing him. Were you saying, I am saying the galaxy is not binary. It is not simply loyalty and heresy. It is a complex organism. Sometimes a system fails. Sometimes a single cell behaves in an unexpected way, and in doing so, prevents a greater catastrophe the system itself was too blunt to foresee. Kael put the slate away. You are not a hero. You are a malfunction that, by pure chance, yielded a functionally adequate result. The Inquisition has no use for heroes, but it has a great need for understanding malfunctions. The energy field at the cell entrance shimmered again. Kael stood. Your fate is not sealed, Navigator Thorne. It is repurposed. You will not be mind-scrubbed. You will not be executed. You will be given a new name, a new identity, and you will serve, not on a bridge, but in the shadows. Your particular sensitivity to the flaws in our own machinery is a rare commodity. We will teach you to look for other cracks, to find the points where the logic of the Imperium turns against itself, and to whisper them to us before they become wounds. Thorne was led from the cell, not to an execution chamber, but to a nondescript quarters. The message was clear. The machine had not forgiven him. It had simply found a new, more niche function for him. He was no longer a navigator of the novice Nobelite. He was a ghost, a whisper agent for the very power that sought to enforce the rigid order he had broken. As the Ashen Wake slipped into warp, bound for some unknown station, Aris Thorne looked out a small, reinforced viewport at the screaming colors of the Imperium. He had saved a world. He had been condemned for it. And now, he had been saved by the cold, pragmatic calculus of the very regime he had betrayed. He was not free. He was a cog that had been removed, examined, and placed into a different, darker machine. The silence he had chosen was now his profession, and somewhere in the endless, roaring pain that surrounded the Golden Throne, he wondered if the pressure had, for one impossible moment, truly lessened.